And now you can just close your eyes and relax, or if you're working away, you can kind of work away. If you're doing some chores, just do some chores. Just let the story wash over you. Pluck out anything you want to pluck out, or don't. So, we're not too serious here. Imagine that once upon a time, there was a little girl who held a paintbrush. Now, this paintbrush was not an ordinary paintbrush. This paintbrush could erase whatever she wanted to erase. So this means that if she saw a butterfly, she could just walk up to the butterfly. If she could reach it, she could brush the paintbrush on the butterfly and the butterfly would erase. And she'd just laugh. How interesting. She'd just go to the next thing. Maybe there's a leaf. She took her brush to the leaf and the leaf just disappeared. Weird. So she took it to a blade of grass. She brushed the brush on the blade of grass. Disappeared. So she was like, okay, this paintbrush that I found kind of appeared out of nowhere in my hand, can erase stuff. So she started moving to bigger objects just to see what would happen. It was quite amusing to her. So she'd walk over to a tree, brush the tree, and the tree would disappear. But she noticed that there were birds chirping in the background that have also just suddenly disappeared. So she walked over to a bush, and then she brushed it onto the bush and realized that the bush that had a few berries on it also disappeared with all of the plants and all of the food. And she's like, okay, so it gets rid of the food too. So she's like, let's do something a bit bigger. So she knew there was like a pond somewhere nearby, so she kind of made her way to the pond and she dipped the paintbrush into the pond. And in the pond, the water completely disappeared. It was just a hole in the ground, no fish, no plants in it, just a dry hole in the ground. And she giggled and thought this was amazing. So she ran into the pond, and as she was running into the hole in the ground, the brush accidentally brushed across her clothes, and then her clothes disappeared. And she's like, oh no, like mommy's gonna be probably kind of mad that I ruined her outfit that she sewed for me. So she's like, okay, if this can erase stuff, maybe it can make stuff. So she's tried, flicking it, she tried throwing it, but anytime it left her hand, nothing happened. It seemed to be that she had to be holding the pen to have it erase objects, and nothing she could really do would bring an object back. So she realized that maybe there was something a bit off about this. So she very gingerly picked it up and then walked back home, not touching anything. So her walk back home was quite a ways. She has very little legs, and it was very difficult for her to keep remembering to hold out the brush and not touch anything, let alone herself. So she walked over to her mother, and her mother's like, oh, why are you naked? And she's just like, where are your clothes? And she said the brush disappeared them. And then the mother was about to grab the brush, and the little girl started crying. She says, no, because if you touch the brush, I'll erase you, like when I'm erasing my drawings. And then the mother had no idea what she was saying. And then the little girl said, look, look, look. And she ran over to a little bucket on the ground, brushed the bucket, and the bucket disappeared. And the mother was just staring at the bucket for a very long time. And she said very carefully to the little girl, where did you find this brush? And the little girl shrugged and she says, it just showed up in my hand. And she said, have you ever used this brush before? She said, well, I brushed a tree and then the bird stopped. And then I brushed the pond and then the pond stopped. And so the mother said, okay, stay still. So the mother very slowly walks over and grabs the brush very gingerly from the little girl, making sure not to touch the brush, and nothing happens. So she says, I'm going to try this. And so she walks over to a rock on the ground and very gingerly touches the rock on the ground, but nothing happens. She does it with several more objects. Nothing happens. She says, come here, Eleanor, the little girl's name. So Eleanor comes over, and she holds the brush with the mother, and then as they start touching stuff, it disappears. So the mother says, oh my goodness. So she takes the brush from the little girl and she says, don't tell anybody about this. Mommy's gonna hold this brush because this is very dangerous. And then the little girl just says, okay. And then they just take her inside, get her some new clothes, and the mother puts the brush very carefully away in a cabinet in the kitchen, very, very, very high up from what the little girl can reach. And so they continue the day as normal. Mother waits for the husband to get home. So little girl's asleep by this point. The husband works really late. He comes in the door, notices the wife's face, and says, what's wrong? And then the mother looks at the father and says, there's something I have to show you. So she very gingerly takes out this paintbrush and opens it. She says, don't touch the paintbrush. But our daughter came back today, and if she touches this brush to anything, it disappears. And he was just started laughing because he's like, what on earth are you talking about? And he thinks she might have gone a little crazy because he's just like, you're insane. So she's like, no, come here. So their daughter's sleeping, and then she puts the brush in her hand and she holds a piece of paper, and then the brush touches the piece of paper and the paper disappears. And he's like, what? And then she takes a cup of water that was beside her, touches the paintbrush to it when it's still in their daughter's hand, and then the water and the glass disappear as well. And he just stares at her, and then stares at the paintbrush, and then stares at their daughter, and then he just walks out. So she starts hysterically chuckling because she doesn't really know what to do. She takes the paintbrush back, puts it very carefully away, puts it above in the kitchen cabinet, and she says, our daughter found this today, and it's called an eraser paintbrush, and it erases anything. She erased a whole tree, she erased a whole pond, she erased a bucket, and if I hold it, it doesn't work. You can try it later. And they just stared at each other for a while, not really knowing what to do. So he just sits there in silence, expecting just a regular evening to come home to and just get ready for bed and not have to think about anything at all. Instead, he's faced with this. So he decides to say, I think we should just get rid of it. I think we should just not deal with this because we are not the type of people who know what to do with this. And the mother says, I don't think that's a good idea. What if it comes in handy one day? The father says, what do you mean? She says, well, what if she needs it for self-defense? What if she has something that's really heavy and she just wants to get rid of it? What if it's just handy one day? And then the father was like, no. This is something way too powerful for a little girl to have. I'll protect her. She doesn't need anything like this. So they were quietly arguing for quite a while about whether they should keep this in the house or not keep this in the house. And at the end of the day, they decided to bury it very deep in the backyard. That way it's out of sight. The daughter can't reach it. Nobody can really reach it. Nobody has to know about it. However, should they ever need it at some point, they can dig it up again. So, awesome. That's great. So, many years pass. Now the daughter is grown up. She has babies of her own. She's completely forgotten about the accident. She kind of thought it was a dream, really, because the parents never spoke of it again. And she just brushed the whole thing off like it was an interesting thought that she had as a child. However, one day, she's going to do some deep landscaping in the backyard. She's going to do some gardening. Her parents have unfortunately at this point passed on, so she is the sole owner of the property now. And as she's preparing for this garden, there's one point where she has to dig quite deeply into the ground to prepare for a certain vegetable to be grown there and to prepare the land for the new terrain to be placed there. And she stumbles across a metal box. And she is very confused by this, doesn't really understand what's going on, but she very slowly digs the box out. No one is around her. And she takes the box and she opens it up and she sees the paintbrush, and all these memories flash back. She remembers how it just appeared for her one day. She took rid of the tree, she took out the pond, and she showed her mother. She got rid of the bucket, and then nothing was ever spoke of it again. So she picked up the paintbrush and she accidentally touched the metal box that it was in, and the metal box disappeared. And she stared at this brush for so long. She didn't know what to do. She was on the verge of hyperventilating, and she just had no idea what was going on. And she heard her beautiful daughter's voice in the background calling for her, and she just said, "1 minute," and stared at the brush. All she could think to do was just drop it back into the ground, and because she wasn't touching it, it just fell into the ground. She covered all the dirt back up and she ran inside and forgot about it. She didn't garden, she didn't go into the backyard for a very long time. Many years pass again. The backyard is untouched. The vegetable garden was never made. It was a bit confusing for her husband, but things happen. So one day, when one of her daughters is leaving the house to go to school, she decides to venture back into the backyard and dig it up again because she just wants to get rid of this thing. She doesn't understand what to do with it. She doesn't understand what to use it for. She's just so frazzled by the whole concept. It's starting to just consume her very quietly. So she picks up the paintbrush, and as she's doing so, she hears a gentleman calling out for the owner of the house. He says, "Hello, is anyone here?" She's like, "Oh yeah, I'll be right there." She's just assuming it's the postman or something. So she's still holding the brush, and she comes out around to the front, and her hands are all dirty, and she's holding a paintbrush, and just the postman is actually there, and he just says, "Hey, I have a parcel for you. You have to sign it." And she's like, "Oh, great, okay." So she very carefully holds the paintbrush in one hand. She takes his pen, and she signs his parcel. And as she's grabbing the parcel, the paintbrush accidentally touches the man, and the man disappears. She stares there. She drops the parcel, and she doesn't know what to do. Her heart starts beating. Her body starts to feel cold. She looks around, and they don't have really any neighbors, but it still doesn't matter. This isn't real. This didn't just happen. There wasn't just somebody here. However, she walks a little further out the driveway and she sees the postman's car. It's still running, ready for him. So she walks over to the postman's car, takes her paintbrush, and puts it on the car, and the car disappears. And she has no idea what she's doing now, and she's weirdly calm. So she decides to walk all the way to the end of her property and touch her mailbox that has her address on it, and she just touches that too, just to get rid of her address, even though the driveway's still there. And she just walks back to her house, puts the paintbrush on the very top shelf in the kitchen where her mom put it before when she was younger, even though she had no idea that's where her mom put it. And she closes the cabinet and just sits on the couch. She acts like nothing happens, and then several days pass. Eventually, a cop comes to her address. And she takes the paintbrush and she opens the door. And again, no one's home. Her husband's at work, her kids are at school. And she opens the door and she sees that the cop is there. He says, "Hello, I have some questions to ask for you. Do you mind if I have a moment of your time?" And she says, "Yeah, sure." So he's asking her some questions very clearly about the missing postman. And she's starting to breathe really heavily, and she's holding the paintbrush, and she just very slowly reaches out and touches the policeman with the paintbrush. He disappears. She walks over to his car, does the same thing, disappears. A day later, another person shows up. They're at the door. They're saying the same thing, but a bit more aggressively now. And she notices that she can see his police car, and there's someone else in the police car sitting in it. So now there's two people. One is in the car, and one is at her door. So he says, "Hey, do you mind answering some questions?" And she says, "Sure." And she plays innocent. She pretends she has no idea what they're talking about. And eventually she says, "Maybe I can go to the station and help out and answer some questions." And he says, "You know what? That would be super helpful. Thank you for accommodating us." So he leads her to the car. She waits until he gets in, and she has the door open, and then she just touches the police car, and both of them disappear inside the car. So now 4 people have completely disappeared from this paintbrush, and she has no idea how she feels about this. She is pretty much numb at this point and just walks back inside and puts the paintbrush on the top of the shelf and closes the cabinet door. This time, the next day, 3 people show up, and they do not look like policemen. They have suits on, they look a lot different, and they have a lot sharper eyes. They seem to be asking a lot more stern questions, and they ask to come inside, and she says sure. So she allows them in, and she serves them some tea, which they don't drink from. And they're asking her some questions, asking her where her husband is, asking her about her children and what she does. And she just feels very interrogated. So she goes into the kitchen saying, "I'm just going to grab some more sugar." And then she takes the paintbrush from the top of the shelf and just walks out and very lightly brushes the first person on the back of the neck with the paintbrush, and he just disappears. The guy beside him freaks out, and she does the same thing with him. And then there's a guy a little further away on a different sofa section, and he stands up, and she says, "I don't understand what's going on. These people are just disappearing." And he's just staring at her with his mouth open. And so he freaks out and takes a gun out and holds it up towards her. And she says, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I don't know what you just did, but put your arms up." And so she goes like, "Okay, I'll put my arms up." But she's still holding her tea, still holding the paintbrush with the other hand. And he says, "Drop what you're holding." And she says, "Okay." So she very gently places the tea on a surface nearby, and she refuses to drop the paintbrush. And he says, "Drop what you're holding." And she says, "Yes, but it's very important to me. I don't want to drop it." And he says, "Drop what you're holding." And she refuses to, so he shoots her. And she falls to the ground, and the paintbrush that she's holding hits herself. And so she suddenly left the world. Everything around her goes black. She doesn't seem to feel where she is anymore. She doesn't feel the pain of the bullet wound. She doesn't feel the sensation of the paintbrush. She doesn't feel the sensation of the floor beneath her. It's just all black around her. So there's this white light that shows up in front of her. It says, "Hello, child." She says, "Hello back." And then this white light says to her, "Do you know what you did?" She says, "Not really." White light says, "Okay. What do you think happened?" She says, "I don't know. People were bothering me, and then I just made them go away." White light says, "Okay. Where do you think they go after you touch them with the paintbrush?" She says, not here. And she just doesn't understand what the light is trying to tell her. So she feels that this white light is just taking some time to look at her. It doesn't have eyes, doesn't have a body, but she somehow feels like the light is like a person of a sense. So this white light seems like it's looking at her. And she just looks back very nonchalantly and says, like, why does everybody care about the paintbrush? And then the white light says, why do you think everyone cares about the paintbrush? And she says, I don't know, I just use it and things happen. He says, right. So why do you think you were given the paintbrush? And she says, I don't know. I don't really understand what it is. And the white light says, okay, what do you think it is? And she says, just an eraser. And the white light says, okay, what if this brush that you're using isn't so much an eraser, isn't so much a paintbrush, but it's a representation of you no longer wanting to deal with something. And she says, what? He says, yes. What if this paintbrush represented anything that you no longer wanted to interact with? And she said, I had no problem interacting with the postman, I just accidentally hit him. The white light goes, I know, but maybe the postman to you represented people, represented your parents, represented something that you just didn't want to deal with. You could have very carefully not touched the postman. And she said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the white light says, okay, that's okay. If you didn't learn your lesson, which is okay, are you open to trying all of this again, starting from when you're 4? And she says, what? So the white light says, you didn't learn anything. You don't feel anything. We're going to do this all over again. Goodbye. And then she shows up. All of a sudden, she's 4 again. She's very young. She sees a paintbrush in her hand. And she sees a butterfly in front of her. She tries to touch it with the paintbrush to the butterfly. And the butterfly disappears. And she doesn't remember anything. And this story has happened 1,254 times. And I am the white light observing the scenario, waiting for the little girl to finally understand that everything that she does, everything that she thinks about, everything that she feels, everything that she touches, whether it's with a metaphorical paintbrush or with her words, or with her actions, or with her thoughts, has a consequence. And until she realizes this, she continually repeats the same problems over and over and over again. So, you might be, or you might not be, the girl with the paintbrush. Either answer is okay. But just know that whatever path you choose to take, whether it's the paintbrush over and over and over, or whether it's setting down the paintbrush and realizing that maybe you should face what you don't want to face, whatever you choose is a choice. And that's the end of the story. So thanks so much for listening. And comment below what your thoughts were, or don't. Goodbye.